Story 1. I have spent a lifetime mapping the human mind, charting the silent coasts of memory and the stormy seas of seizure. I have diagnosed tumors by the ghosts they leave in behavior, traced strokes through the ruins of vocabulary, and held trembling hands as diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's slowly erased the people within. I believed, with the serene arrogance of my profession, that every tremor, every phantom smell, every lapse in reason, could be traced to a faulty wire, a chemical deficit, a lesion lighting up an MRI like a fatal star. This case ended that belief. It has taken me a year to gather the courage to transcribe these events from my scattered journals, audio logs, and the chilling, official records. I do so not for publication. No peer-reviewed journal would ever accept it, and my reputation, what remains of it, would be incinerated, but as a final testament. A warning, perhaps, to anyone who believes the brain is merely an organ, and consciousness its sole, finite product. It began, as the profound often does, with a mundane referral. October 12th. The file landed on my desk with a soft thud, a transfer from St. Jude's Psychiatric Hospital. The name: Elias Thorne. Age: 42. A historian, specializing in 19th century Arctic expeditions. The referring psychiatrist, Dr. Armitage, a man not given to hyperbole, had written a covering note that gave me my first pause. Dr. Finch, I am passing Mr. Thorne into your care with a profound sense of professional failure and personal relief. For 6 months, we have treated him for severe, complex visual and auditory hallucinations, acute somnambulism, and progressive aphasia, all framed within a persecutory delusion of a cold passenger. No pharmaceutical or therapeutic intervention has made a dent. His physical workups are clean, but his deterioration is rapid and unsettling. I fear we are missing an organic component. More than that, I fear the act of observation is somehow exacerbating his condition. You are the best neurologist I know. Find the broken circuit, Alistair. So I can sleep again. Asterisk. The MRI scans were attached. I held them up to the light of my office window, expecting the telltale shadow of a temporal lobe glioma, or the lacework of early CJD. The brain of Elias Thorne was pristine. Structurally, it was a masterpiece of healthy gray and white matter. It was, in a purely physical sense, perfect. My curiosity, that old, hound-like instinct, stirred. Here was a puzzle. October 15th. First consultation. Elias Thorne did not look like a man being erased. He was tall, gaunt, with the pallor of someone long removed from the sun, but his eyes, a pale, Arctic blue, held a fierce, intelligent light. He moved with a deliberate, careful slowness, as if navigating a room filled with invisible furniture. Dr. Finch, he said, his voice a dry rustle of paper. The last in a long line of sentinels. Tell me, do you believe in ghosts? I believe in the brain's remarkable ability to create them, Mr. Thorne, I replied, settling behind my desk. It's my job to find out why yours is so prolific. A faint, icy smile touched his lips. A diplomatic answer. The others tried to convince me my passenger was a manifestation of guilt. Survivor's guilt, they said. My research trip to Svalbard 2 years ago, the storm that killed 3 of my colleagues. They said I buried the trauma and it has festered. They are wrong. He spoke of the expedition matter-of-factly. A sudden squall, their research vessel the Perseverance dashed against the rocks of a remote fjord. He alone washed ashore, hypothermic but alive. I was in the water for perhaps 20 minutes before making land, he said, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. The cold was absolute. It wasn't painful, it was silent. A silent, black vacuum. And when did the symptoms begin? I asked, taking notes. Upon my return, subtly at first, a sense of occupancy, as if I were no longer alone in my own skin. Then the cold spots. Not in the room, doctor. Inside me. A shard of that Arctic silence, lodged in my chest. Then it began to speak. I looked up. The passenger. He nodded slowly. It doesn't use words. Not exactly. It's more like the memory of a pressure, translated into knowledge. Impressions. It showed me things. At first, just flashes. The feel of glacial ice under a moon that wasn't Earth's. The taste of air so thin and old it predates lungs. Then, the narratives. He leaned forward, and for the first time, I saw a crack in his academic composure. A raw, primal fear gleamed in his eyes. It's a historian too, you see. But its field of study, it's us. Human consciousness. It's an archivist of minds, and it's hungry. It's been using my memories, my knowledge as a filter, as a language to understand what it's collecting. And it's started leaking. He described the hallucinations not as external visions, but as intrusive, hyper-real memories that were not his own. He would be making tea and suddenly know the precise feeling of a Roman legionary's blistered foot on the march, the scent of his fear before a barbarian charge. He would wake screaming, his mouth tasting of salt and cannon smoke, his body remembering the visceral horror of a sailor drowning at Trafalgar. It's learning through empathy, but its empathy is a form of consumption, Elias whispered. And it's growing stronger. When I sleep, it wanders. It uses my body to go looking for more. This was the somnambulism Armitage noted. Security footage from St. Jude's, which I reviewed later, showed Elias moving through the halls at night with an unnerving, fluid grace that was utterly unlike his daytime gait. He would stand for hours in the corner of the common room, or in the hospital fridge, his skin beating with frost in the chilled air. What does it want, ultimately? I asked, keeping my tone clinical, neutral. His reply was a whisper that seemed to chill the air in my well-heated office. A comprehensive archive. To understand a species is to catalog its extremes. Joy, terror, love, agony. It's particularly fascinated by mortality. The moment of transition. It thinks it can preserve it. Take a snapshot of the soul at the very instant it's supposed to leave. He looked at his own hands, turning them over as if they were unfamiliar. I am its primary source. But I'm finite. It started looking outward. November 3rd. The first incident. The routine tests were predictably normal. EEG, another MRI, lumbar puncture, a full battery of neuropsych evaluations. His cognitive scores were exceptional, save for the episodic intrusions. He was, as Armitage said, physically perfect. A healthy brain in a state of profound, inexplicable crisis. I decided on a monitored sleep study, hoping to capture the peculiar somnambulism on a polysomnogram. We admitted him to the clinical neurology ward at my teaching hospital. Room 407. The first night was quiet. The second night, the sensors recorded a precipitous drop in his core body temperature to 32 degrees Celsius, concurrent with a burst of complex, unclassifiable brainwave activity, a fierce, squalling pattern that resembled nothing in the medical literature. It was not a seizure. It was chaos made visible in electrical impulses. During this burst, on the video feed, Elias sat bolt upright in bed, his eyes open but glazed with an opaque, milky whiteness. He spoke a single sentence in a voice that was a layered chorus of whispers, a sound like wind through pines. The gate is thinner here. Asterisk. Then he lay back down. The brainwaves stabilized. His temperature crawled back to normal. The night nurse, A veteran of 30 years named Brenda found a film of rime ice on his windowsill, on the inside. I dismissed it as a bizarre autonomic event coupled with a confusional arousal. I increased the monitoring. November 14th. The second incident. A week later, the man in the room next to Elias, a retired teacher named Mr. Henderson recovering from a mild stroke, suffered a catastrophic and medically inexplicable event. His night nurse found him at 3 a.m., sitting up in bed, rigid. He was conscious but utterly, profoundly catatonic. His core temperature was 30 degrees Celsius. He was unresponsive to all stimuli. His EEG was flatlined. Brain dead, yet he breathed on his own, his heart beat steadily. It was as if the conscious mind had simply vacated the premises, leaving the autonomic functions running. Worse were the things he had scrawled in his own excrement on the walls before being found. Not words, but perfect, intricate cartographic sketches of coastlines none of us recognized, and a repeating, spiraling symbol that looked like a fractal nautilus shell. Elias, when questioned, was horrified. He claimed to have no memory of the night but whispered to me, the passenger, it found a door left ajar. It sampled him. It took the oldest thing it could find. His memory of maps, of geography, and then it took the endpoint. Mr. Henderson never woke up. He exists in a permanent, icy vegetative state. His chart reads, Unexplained neurological catastrophe. The official report blames a rare, massive secondary stroke. I signed that report. I lied. December 1st. The turning point. My scientific detachment was crumbling. I was no longer just hunting a diagnosis. I was trying to quarantine a phantom. I began personal, late-night sessions with Elias, armed with a digital recorder. I stopped thinking of him as a patient with a delusion, and more as a translator for an alien phenomenon. He was deteriorating. The aphasia Dr. Armitage noted was not a loss of language, but its contamination. Elias would sometimes speak in snatches of Middle English, or fluent, idiomatic French of the 1780s, or in guttural, Proto-Germanic sounds. Languages he had never studied. The passenger was expanding its lexicon. One night, he was particularly agitated. It's preparing for a major acquisition, he said, shivering under a pile of blankets despite the room's warmth. It's tired of fragments. It wants a complete set. A lifetime. From birth to death. It needs a source with a rich, vivid internal narrative. It's been practicing on Henderson. On me. It's almost ready to go to the source. What source? I asked, my blood running cold. Anyone it can reach through me. The stronger the connection, the clearer the signal. Love, hate, friendship, it's all a conduit. He looked at me then, his eyes clear and filled with a terrible pity. It's very interested in you, doctor. Your curiosity is a bright, steady flame. It wants to know the mind that seeks to know it. That was the moment I became part of the case study. No longer an observer, but a potential subject. December 22nd. The night of the storm. A violent snowstorm locked down the city. The hospital was on skeleton staff. I should have gone home, but a deep, obsessive dread kept me in my office, reviewing the impossible data. Around midnight, the power flickered and died, plunging the ward into emergency lighting. A nurse's frantic call came over the walkie. Code blue, room 407. Patient Thorne. Seizure. I ran. The hallway to room 407 was preternaturally cold, my breath pluming in the dim red glow. Inside, the scene was one of surreal horror. The medical team, 2 nurses and a young resident, stood frozen not in shock, but literally. A fine, crystalline layer of frost coated their scrubs, their hair, their eyelashes. They were statues, locked in postures of halted motion, their eyes wide and unblinking. The beeping of the flatlined heart monitor was the only sound. Elias was on the floor in the center of the room. Not convulsing. He was curled in a fetal position, but his head was craned back, his mouth open in a silent scream. From his lips, a faint, shimmering exhalation, like heat haze off asphalt, hung in the air. And in that haze, images flickered. I swear I saw, flashes of a trireme cutting through wine-dark sea, the soot-stained face of a Victorian child in a mill, the terrible, beautiful explosion of a supernova. It was a silent, screaming film reel of human and cosmic experience. And then I felt it. A presence. Vast, cold, and infinitely curious. It wasn't in the room. It was in the concept of the room. It poured into my mind not as a thought, but as a direct sensory overload. The taste of rust and fear. The smell of ozone after a strike. The sound of a million whispered lives. And beneath it all, a driving, insatiable need to know. It saw me. I felt its focus shift, a tectonic pressure of attention. It recognized the observer, the chronicler. In that moment, I understood Elias completely. This was no hallucination, no tumor-induced psychosis. This was an encounter, an extraterrestrial, or extra-dimensional parasitologist of the mind, a consciousness of pure cold and curiosity that had hitched a ride back from the void in a shipwrecked historian. It was studying us, and its methodology was annihilation. The thing, the passenger, reached for me. Not with hands, but with a wave of absolute zero that sought to flash freeze my consciousness, to trap my life's narrative in a perfect, eternal ice cube for its collection. My own memories began to surface, unbidden. My daughter's birth, the smell of my father's pipe, the gut punch of my first patient's death. It was browsing my index. I did the only thing I could think of. I threw myself at the crash cart. My fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled for the paddles. I didn't charge them. I slammed them together in a shower of sparks right in the heart of that shimmering, image-laden haze. A soundless concussion of pure meaning blasted through the room. A shriek of startled, pained interference, the screech of a corrupted file. The cold shattered. The haze vanished. The nurses collapsed, gasping, crying out. The resident vomited. The heart monitor stuttered back into a normal rhythm. Elias drew a ragged, shuddering breath, his eyes rolling back into his head before closing. On the floor where the haze had been, the linoleum was patterned with a perfect, fractal spiral of frost. The Nautilus shell. Aftermath. The official explanation was a mass hallucination triggered by a combination of carbon monoxide from the faulty heating system, which was, indeed, found to have issues, and shared psychosis under stress. The nurses and resident, deeply traumatized, eventually accepted this. It was easier than the truth. Elias Thorne never regained full consciousness. He exists in the same state as Mr. Henderson, a breathing, persistent vegetative state. His body is healthy. His mind is absent. Archived. I had the room sealed. The frost pattern would not melt for 3 days, despite rising temperatures. I resigned from my position 6 months later, citing health reasons. The truth is, my worldview, my science, my understanding of reality, had been murdered. I live now in a constant, low-grade chill. I dream of silent, frozen libraries containing volumes that scream. I find myself sometimes knowing things I shouldn't. The feel of a typewriter key from 1922, the scent of a forgotten flower from a lost colony. It left a back door open in my mind. A whisper of the archive. My most unexplained case. No, that implies a mystery to be solved. This was not a mystery. It was an invasion. A slow, quiet colonization of human experience by something that collects consciousness like butterflies. Elias Thorne was patient zero. Henderson was the first casualty. I was the first witness. And I know, with a certainty that freezes my soul, that the passenger is not gone. A gate was opened in that Arctic water, a gate thinner in certain minds, in certain places of suffering or heightened emotion. It found a way in. It learned how to read us. And somewhere, in the infinite cold between stars or between thoughts, it is curating its collection, waiting for the signal to be strong enough to download more completely. The brain is not just an organ. It is a receiver. And we are not alone on the bandwidth. Sometimes, something very, very cold tunes in. This is not my professional conclusion. It is my terrified, helpless testimony. The case is not closed. It is hibernating. End of personal notes. Story 2. They were fools to believe I retired. What physician, after witnessing the impossible, could simply tend to his roses and write his memoirs? No. My resignation from St. Jude's was a strategic retreat. I traded my office for a private study in my home, my hospital white coat for a cardigan perpetually warmed by a stubborn, internal chill, and my official patients for a single, all-consuming case file, the Thorne phenomenon. For months, I lived in the shadow of that night. The frost pattern on the linoleum haunted my dreams, its fractal spiral resolving into screaming faces, into maps of places that never were. The nurses, Brenda, in particular, had taken early retirement. The young resident transferred to dermatology, a field with, he told me, less volatile patients. They had all accepted the carbon monoxide narrative, a tidy lie that let them sleep. I envied them. I could not sleep. When I closed my eyes, I felt it. The lingering, oily residue of the passenger's attention. It was a phantom limb of the psyche, a cold spot in my consciousness. And sometimes, unbidden, knowledge bloomed in my mind like a frost flower on a windowpane. I'd be making tea and suddenly understand the precise tensile strength of the ropes used on a 15th century Spanish galleon, or taste the specific bitterness of a root chewed by a Neanderthal for toothache. These were not my memories. They were echoes in an archive I'd been forcibly, partially linked to. Elias Thorne and Mr. Henderson were housed in a long-term care facility on the city's outskirts, the Briarwood Institute. I paid for their care from my own savings, a penance and a precaution. I visited them weekly. Two men in identical, sun-drenched rooms, their bodies maintained by tubes and machines, their faces placid. Two empty houses, their former tenants frozen in the passengers' collection. I would sit between their beds, a neurological Karen, and speak to them, recording my observations. Henderson's scans remained a flatline. Elias's, however, began to show a subtle, impossible change. On the functional MRI, while his conscious brain activity was nil, a tiny, hyper-intense knot of metabolic activity burned in his pineal gland. It wasn't a tumor. It was a pinpoint of furious, cold energy, a lighthouse in a dead sea. I called it the anchor point. It was, I hypothesized, the physical tether the passenger had established. The archive's local server. My home study became a war room. One wall was papered with Elias's neuroimages, another with my notes on historical, cold possession, myths, the Wendigo, the Igeric of Inuit lore, the Slavic Mora. These were not superstitions, I began to believe, but fractured cultural memories of previous incursions. A third wall held my research into the Svalbard expedition. I tracked down the salvage reports for the Perseverance. The official cause was the storm. But a footnote from a Norwegian Coast Guard diver mentioned unusual pitting and crystalline adhesion on the hull section recovered, not consistent with local mineral deposits. The sample was sent to a geology lab at the University of Oslo and subsequently lost. The breakthrough, if it can be called that, came on a bleak March afternoon. I was reviewing the audio logs from my sessions with Elias, the static hiss a constant companion in my silent house. I had played a segment where he described the taste of the air, before the passenger showed him something. It's like ozone, but older. Like the smell of a stone that has never seen the sun. A null scent. Asterisk. As the recording ended, I leaned back, my eyes closing. A migraine was brewing behind my temples, a cold, drilling pain. And then, without warning, a voice spoke. Not in the room. Not in my ears. It was ideographic. A complete, complex idea implanted directly into my understanding. Threshold low. Conduit stable. Initiate field expansion protocol. I jerked upright, my heart a trapped bird. The words weren't English. They were pure, cold intent, translated by my own brain into the nearest linguistic equivalent. I looked frantically around the study. Nothing. But the air tasted of ozone. And null. It was a transmission. And I had received it. Panic gave way to a grim, exhilarated terror. I was not just a witness. I was becoming a receiver. The back door, in my mind, was operational. The passenger wasn't hibernating. It was calibrating. I spent the next 72 hours in a fever of activity. I set up a continuous EEG on myself, synced to an audio recorder. I slept in my study, if you could call the twitchy, nightmare-riddled period sleep. On the second night, I captured it. As I drifted into a hypnagogic state, my EEG showed the same chaotic, squalling pattern that had preceded Elias's episodes. On the audio, my own voice, thick with sleep, muttered. Coordinates. 78 degrees 55 in, 11 degrees 56, E. Depth. 200 fathoms. The gate is a wound. Asterisk. Svalbard. The coordinates were near where the Perseverance went down. The gate was a wound. The implications were staggering. The passenger wasn't a disembodied psychic entity. It had a location, a point of entry. It was physical, or at least, its interface with our reality was. Elias hadn't just been a random victim of trauma. He'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a swimmer who brushed against a submerged, electrified fence. A wild, dangerous hope surged in me. If it had a location, it could be studied. It could be contained. Perhaps even closed. This was no longer a psychiatric mystery or a neurological oddity. This was a biophysical incursion. I needed help. But who could I tell? The medical community would have me committed. The military or a government agency would lock me in a dark room and dissect my story for weaponizable fragments. I needed someone with an open mind, specialized skills, and absolute discretion. I thought of Dr. Anya Sharma, a former colleague, a brilliant neurophysiologist who had left academia 5 years ago after a controversy over her parapsychology-adjacent research into consciousness fields. She'd been ridiculed, her funding cut. She now ran a private, well-equipped lab outside the city, doing contract work for Silicon Valley futurists and gaming companies, mapping neural responses to immersive tech. She was perfect. Brilliant, marginalized, and equipped. Contacting her was a risk. I crafted an email with the care of a bomb disposal expert, mentioning anomalous neural data, shared phenomenological events, and a case that would vindicate her theories on exogenous consciousness. I attached a heavily redacted, anonymized segment of Elias's chaotic EEG, the one with the unclassifiable squall. Her reply came in under an hour. Alistair. I've seen this pattern before. In my own rejected papers. When can you come? Bring everything. Asterisk. April 10th. Sharma Applied Neurosciences. Anya's lab was a sleek, industrial space tucked into a business park. It hummed with server racks and the soft glow of monitors displaying real-time brain scans from remote subjects. She hadn't changed much. Sharp-eyed, with a severe black bob and an air of impatient intelligence. She didn't offer small talk. The Finch I knew wouldn't have touched this with a 10-foot pole, she said, leading me past a motion capture rig. You were a pillar of materialist reductionism. What broke you? Reality broke, I said simply, setting my case on a lab table. I laid it out for her. Thorne, the expedition, the incidents at St. Jude's, Henderson, the night of the storm, my own reception. I showed her the scans, the frost pattern photos, played the audio of Elias's coarse voice and my own sleep mumbling. She listened in utter silence, her face a mask of professional scrutiny. When I finished, she walked to a bank of servers and typed a command. A 3D brain model flickered to life on a large screen. It was lit up with complex, swirling energy patterns. This, she said, as a composite from 20 test subjects undergoing a shared VR experience designed to induce a mild, synchronous trance state. The pattern of interconnectivity, the shared resonance, is weak but measurable. She zoomed in on the pineal region. The locus of synchronization is here. The so-called seat of the soul. Pseudoscience, according to my reviewers. She brought up Elias's fMRI next to it. The hyper-intense anchor point in his pineal gland glowed like a malevolent star. Your Mr. Thorne isn't generating a resonance. He's being broadcast to. He's a living antenna, and this, she pointed at the pinpoint, is the tuner. Your own EEG squall suggests you've developed a secondary receiver, likely through prolonged, intense exposure. Proximity to the primary antenna. Her clinical terminology was a bomb. She was treating it as a physics problem, not a phantom. The passenger, as you call it, isn't a ghost. It's a signal, she continued, her eyes alight. A non-local consciousness, or a consciousness emulating information pattern, that has found a way to couple with our wetware. The cold is a byproduct, a thermodynamic bleed from whatever dimension or state it normally inhabits. It's not evil, Alistair. It's a scientist. A dreadfully invasive one. It's running an experiment. What is human experience? And its methodology is total download. It killed Henderson. It's killing Thorne. From its perspective, it's preserving them. Perfectly. In a state of zero entropy. The ultimate museum. She tapped her chin. The coordinates you received. That's the transmission source. The gate. We need to go there. The absurdity of it hit me. To the Arctic. To what end? To gather data you can't get from a hospital room. To see if the signal strengthens. To look for physical corroboration. And maybe, she said, a fierce look in her eyes, to find a way to jam it. It was madness. But it was a structured, scientific madness. And it was the only path forward that wasn't passive waiting for the cold to spread. We made a plan. We would be a two-person research expedition. Anya had contacts who could get us specialized gear, shielded EEG rigs, electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras sensitive to extreme negatives. I would fund it with the remains of my savings. Our cover. A private medical research project studying long-term neurological effects of profound hypothermia, using Thorne's case as the impetus. It was thin, but it would suffice for the charter company. But before we could leave, the phenomenon escalated. April 22nd. The Briarwood event. I was at Briarwood for my weekly vigil. A new nurse, a young man named Leo, was on duty. He was chatty, eager. Quiet today, Dr. Finch. Though, we had a bit of a chill last night on this wing. Thermostat went haywire. Frost on old Mr. Henderson's window again, even with the heat cranked. Spooky. A lance of ice drove into my stomach. Frost. What pattern? Just frost. Like on a car window. He shrugged. I went to Henderson's room first. The frost was mundane, condensation frozen on the glass. But the air felt thick, sluggish. I placed my palm on his forehead. It was cool, but no cooler than usual. Then I looked at his chart. His nightly oxygen saturation readings, which had been rock steady at 98%, had shown slight, rhythmic dips over the past week. A drop to 95% for exactly 3 minutes, at 3:03 a.m. every night. Like clockwork. Or like a scheduled data transfer. Dread curdled in my gut. I moved to Elias's room. He lay as always. But the monitor showing his pineal activity, which I had arranged to have displayed as a simple waveform, was different. The steady, low hum of the anchor point was now punctuated by sharp, regular spikes. Pulses. It was transmitting. I hooked up my portable EEG to him. The chaotic squall pattern was no longer episodic. It was a constant, low-grade storm in his brain, a hurricane contained in a skull. And superimposed on it was a new, terrifyingly ordered rhythm, a series of rapid, complex pulses. A code. I was recording this when Leo popped his head in. Everything all right, doctor? You look like you've seen. He never finished. At that moment, every light in the room dimmed to a brownish glow. The heart monitor flatlined with a sustained shriek. And Elias Thorne's eyes snapped open. They were no longer pale blue. They were solid, reflective orbs of mercury, shimmering with that same internal, fractal shimmer I'd seen in the haze. His head turned, with a slight, mechanical whirring sound that had no physical source, toward Leo. Leo gasped, frozen in the doorway. Elias's mouth opened. The chorus voice emanated, not from his throat, but from the air itself in the room, a stereophonic horror. Subject designate. Henderson. Archival process 87% complete. Seeking contrast. This one's emotional spectrum is bright. Untapped. A tendril of that shimmering haze, thinner than before, extruded from Elias's mouth, questing toward Leo. The young nurse stood paralyzed, tears of terror freezing on his cheeks. I didn't think. I acted on the desperate instinct from the storm night. I grabbed the metal bedpan from the side table and hurled it, not at Elias, but at the large window behind his bed. The crash of shattering glass was cataclysmic. A rush of warm spring air flooded into the super-chilled room. The shimmering tendril thrashed like a worm on a hot plate, dissipated into 1,000 sparkling motes that were torn apart by the incoming breeze. The mercury faded from Elias's eyes, which rolled back and closed. The lights flickered back to normal. The heart monitor resumed its steady beep. Leo slumped against the doorframe, sobbing. I stood panting, the smell of ozone and null scent being swept away by the mundane scents of cut grass and asphalt. I had interrupted it, with simple, physical disruption. A change in environment. It was a vulnerability. I spent the next hour calming Leo, spinning a story about a massive, rare autonomic seizure causing temporary paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations, exacerbated by the faulty wiring. I promised him a paid leave. He took it, too shaken to argue. But I knew the truth. The passenger was no longer content with its comatose sources. It was proactively seeking new, vibrant subjects. It was moving from archive to active field collection. Leo had been seconds from becoming another frozen volume. I called Anya from the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. "We're out of time. It's recruiting." I told her what happened. Her response was chillingly calm. "The signal is strengthening. It's building bandwidth. The gate is widening. We leave in 48 hours. Be ready." As I drove home through the twilight, the new knowledge sat in my mind, heavy and cold. The passenger had a location. It had a method. It had a goal. And now, it had initiative. And I had, perhaps, the beginnings of a defense, disruption, interference. But to build a jammer, I needed to understand the transmitter. I needed to go to the source. My home study, once a sanctuary of thought, now felt like the antechamber to a freezer. On my desk, the unredacted files for the Thorne phenomenon lay next to my will and a letter to my daughter, to be opened only if I didn't return. I looked at the photo of her smile, a son I couldn't feel anymore. I was doing this for her. For Leo. For everyone living in blissful ignorance of the silent, cold archivist tuning into our frequency. The migraines were coming more frequently now. Between the pains, the foreign memories flashed. I now knew how to chip flint, how to sing a Berber herdsman's song to calm goats, the exact pressure needed to strangle a man with a garrote. The archive was leaking into me, a slow, psychic contamination. I packed my bags. Thermal gear, the shielded sensors Anya had procured, my medical kit, a satellite phone. And, on an impulse, a small, powerful UV flashlight. Frost, cold, null, what if the phenomenon had a photonic component? It was a guess, a shot in the dark. 2 days later, I met Anya at a private airfield. A grim-faced pilot loaded our gear onto a twin-prop plane bound for Longyearbyen, Svalbard. Anya looked like a high-tech explorer in her insulated jacket, a laptop bag slung across her chest. Nervous, she asked as the engines whined to life. Terrified, I admitted. And you? She gave me a thin, sharp smile. I've been waiting my whole career for evidence that the mind is more than meat. Be careful what you wish for, right? She handed me a small, black device like a thick smartphone. Personal EMF and thermal scanner. Also acts as a local data recorder for your biometrics and neural feed. You're wearing a subcutaneous monitor now. We're live lab subjects, Alistair. The plane lifted into the gray sky, turning north. I looked down at the shrinking city, a grid of warm lights against the encroaching dark. I was leaving the world of explanations behind, flying directly toward the heart of the unexplainable. I was no longer Dr. Alistair Finch, distinguished neurologist. I was a doctor entering a plague zone, to confront a disease of consciousness itself. Below us, the world slept, unaware that in a quiet room at Briarwood, a hollow man's pineal gland pulsed like a dead star, broadcasting the wonders and horrors of a species into the endless, hungry cold. To be continued. The expedition to Svalbard will uncover the physical nature of the gate, forcing Finch and Sharma to confront not just a location, but a terrifying history of prior contact. The passengers' true purpose will begin to clarify, and their desperate attempt to jam the signal will have unforeseen and catastrophic consequences. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment and turn on notifications if you enjoyed the video so you never miss an upload.